Compost. We're going to take you through the process of making a simple compost that anybody can make almost anywhere. It's just a recipe of ingredients. Now, we've got different manures here that we've gathered from animals around the farm. We've got different carbon materials, as in some dried grass clippings. We've got some green grass clippings. We've got some woody mulch. And I'm going to show you the materials and then we're going to put it together. And as I do, I'm going to explain to you the basic rules of the recipe so that you can always get it right and it'll always work for you, and what the intention is at the end, what it is you end up with as a product. Let's have a look at some of our materials here. Here we have some goat manure. Here we have some cow manure. Here we have some duck manure from the duck pen. All of these manures will work for you. Here we have some chicken manure mixed in with straw. Over here we even have some old pig manure. Right? It doesn't really matter which manure, but if you use a mixture of manures, you'll get a different set of mineral components. Now, that's the fire, that's the nitrogen component, mostly. And here we have some dry grass clippings that have just come off the fields and the paddocks. It's just been slashed with a tractor and raked up. It's not too long, it's reasonably short. You don't want it really, really long, it'll make it hard to turn over. Here we have another component. This is sawdust mixed with compost toilet manure. So this is human manure mixed in. This is human manure that's come out of a compost toilet after it's been sitting for about 3 to 4 months. So it's well processed. It's no longer got any pathogens in it. Over on this side, we have some green grass clippings. This is green material, and on this green material, you'll find there's, if we had a look at this in the microscope, there'd be quite a few soil organisms, and they're kind of captured on here. This is like capturing a yeast. The organisms come with the green material, so we're kind of inoculating with this. We come over this way, we have some wood mulch. These are shredded up hardwood and softwood trees and weed trees. It's been through a shredder. There's actually a worm there. Compost worm already there. This is the fungal food. The fungus likes to break down the wood. Fungus will break down the lignum fibre. So this is good fungal food. The manures are good nitrogen food. And the green material have a lot of organisms captured, particularly things like protozoas. Over this way, this is what we're going to end up with. We're going to end up with a compost. This is quite a woody compost, got quite a lot of woody material. It's probably quite high in fungus. Good material for fertilizing trees because it'll have good fungal dominated life in it. Trees need fungus. A forest grows on a fallen forest, so you have to make a compost that has a lot of fungal organisms, because fungal dominated soils are much better for growing woody trees. Here are the fungal threads, the hyphae, that travel long distances through the soil and break down the lignum fibre of the wood. The fungal threads in the soil, the hyphae, travel for kilometres down and kilometres away from the tree. They come to the trees for the photosynthetic interaction. There they harvest the carbon. They can't photosynthesize, but they can capture elements out at great distance with acid tips that bring back phosphates and other minerals and exchange them with the roots at the root level with the trees in the forest. This is an important situation because there's an actual communication between the stress reaction of the tree transferred through the fungal threads to other trees. This is the internet of the soil. The fungi spores are very easily damaged by inappropriate land use. If there's too much compaction, too much disturbance, too much ploughing, too much chemicals, too much overuse, you'll actually get to a stage where you may have to bring in fungal spores in well-inoculated compost so that you can reintroduce the diversity for a quick recovery. Plants that are herbaceous, non-woody, you're more likely to need a bacterial-dominated compost because the pastures and the vegetable gardens, they favour a nitrogen-rich soil. So a bacterially dominated soil is higher in nitrogen and it grows those faster cycles of non-woody plants. I'm going to take the carbon material and we're just going to make a nice fluffy bottom to this because we want the compost to be aerated at the bottom. We want a nice loose, you can use small sticks if you've got them. Now we're going to have to make 1 cubic metre minimum. That's 1,000 litres. If you try and make a compost any smaller than that, it just won't get hot enough. You have to make sure that it's got the right size, otherwise it won't get up to the right temperature. It's like not having a hot enough oven to cook the cake. Bit of cow manure. Now, the aim is to have 25 parts carbon and 1 part nitrogen. Then the decomposition happens without reducing the size of the material. So we'll try and mix this up with the right proportion so that it gets hot enough, but it doesn't actually lose any volume. The trick of making good compost is to not lose size. You're going to end up with a cubic metre the same as what you started. That's something a lot of people don't believe is possible, but it is possible. We've done it many times, and it's a good indicator that you've got the right mix. If you have too much nitrogen, it'll break down too quickly, and it will start to lose size. It will get very hot, but you'll waste a lot of material because the volume will decrease rapidly, and it will be very smelly as it decomposes. You'll produce a lot of methane. If you've got the right size and you've got the right proportions of carbon to nitrogen ratio, and this is part of the carbon I'm putting on now, what'll happen is it won't smell very much, it'll get up to temperature, but it won't decrease in size very much at all. Now the temperature we're going to have to aim for is a minimum of 50 degrees centigrade. If it doesn't get to 50 degrees centigrade, it won't have broken down all the weed seeds, and it won't have anywhere near the same amount of life in it. Now the maximum temperature you could get to is 70 degrees centigrade, and that's getting a little bit too hot. It's probably going to get anaerobic at that temperature. It's going to go a bit airless. And you've actually gone past the limit a little bit on life. We now realise, looking with a microscope, the best temperature is around 55 to 65. That's the range where there's most diversity of life and most volume of life. Right here in the middle of the pile, we could add some kind of inoculum. I'll cover it up quite quickly. That's a bit of a remains of a dead animal processed on the farm. You can use urine as an inoculum. You can use Comfrey as an inoculum. You can use nettles, and you could use yarrow. You could use fish, or a dead animal that might even just be something you found as a roadkill on the side of the road. It will break down quite quickly in there, and it'll speed up the decomposition. This is Comfrey, and it's one of the compost activators. You don't have to add an activator, but it can help get your initial heat up. So we're going to construct it, and then we're going to leave it for 4 days. And in those 4 days, the organisms are going to get their breed population started. Going to start to build up their numbers, and then after 4 days, we're going to turn it again. And that'll mix a lot of things together, and it'll also kill a lot of organisms, and their bodies are going to be consumed by the next generation of organisms. So this is a sort of thermonuclear life and death cycle. All these little organism colonies are going to burst into life and multiply rapidly and create a lot of heat. There's a lot of breeding going on. It's going to be a little bit cooler on the outside. And when we turn it over, we're going to make the party turn inside out. What's a bit cool and passive on the outside is going to go to the inside and become hot and steamy and very active. The process then will start to take organism to organism, body to body. One colony becomes another colony as it's consumed the dead bodies of the previous party. And the carbon, which life is based in, is going to bond the nitrogen and all the other elements into a humus, a stable humus. Carbon is the sponge, nitrogen is the fuel, and any other elements that are involved then become additions to long chain carbon molecules. So the long chain carbon molecules stick the process together. They become the sponge. Nitrogen's the fuel, and everything else adds a little spice to the event. Even toxic substances, even if there's a little bit of toxicity here in some of these materials, that'll get locked up. That'll get locked up in the long chain carbon molecules and become inert. This is one of the great things about the natural system. It really is ashes to ashes, dust to dust. And these cycles bond up the toxicity, so it's not a problem anymore. That's how the environment neutralizes the effects of toxins. And we're just putting these, the most diverse environment of life in the known universe, the soil organisms. We're putting them to work for us. We couldn't have more workers. And that becomes very obvious when you look in the microscope. We could even add a bit of charcoal at this stage. Charcoal has an enormous surface area, and it creates a habitat for the organisms. So what you've really got is a high density housing commission for soil bacteria that charcoal, with its enormous surface area, a tablespoon of dissolved charcoal can have a surface area of up to 10 acres. That gives an attachment for the organisms to take up residence and hold the fertility in the life form so it can't be leached. It's not the soil itself, it's the soil life that's the most important element. We really need a little bit of chunky material at the end so there's still some food for the fungus. And we don't want it to completely cool down. In the end, it'll be just warm. It won't be completely cold, and it also won't be totally black. A little bit chunky, just warm, and dark brown. And more or less the same size. I don't like to make it in a walled in area because it doesn't have enough air around it. You've got to be careful. This is an aerobic compost. They're aerobic organisms that we're trying to produce. Now we've just got to add a little bit of water to make sure we've got it wet enough. Now, what if you haven't got a temperature gauge? Well, you have to know what day it's going to get the hottest. And we're going to leave this for 4 days, then we're going to turn it. It'll be quite hot by then. But then we're going to turn it every other day for 14 days. So in 18 days, that's the quickest you can do it. 18 days it should be ready. Now on the second or third turn, so that's 6 or 8 days later, this will be its hottest. And it should get between 55 and 65. Hotter than 50, no hotter than 70. How do you tell that it's hot if you haven't got a thermometer? Well, if you put your hand into 50 degrees centigrade, it's warm. You go, ooh, that's hot. And you just don't put your hand into 70 degrees centigrade. It's very hot. A basic gauge of how wet the compost should be. How much moisture should I put on this compost? Let's get some average material. And I crunch it up in my hand. And I give it a really good squeeze. There, it should just drip. It should just drip. That's the moisture test without any laboratory, without any equipment. It's just a squeeze test. A squeeze test and an ouch test up to your elbow. The rest of it's all down to the microbiology doing their thing, having a bit of a party going on. Nothing special about this. We've just got to cover it up. What are we going to end up with? We're going to end up with 1 cubic meter of inoculum compost, not just compost that's broken down with enzymes, but compost that's high in beneficial soil life that can be bred out in our soil through our mulch covered garden beds, through our cover crops. And 1 cubic meter of fertilizer like this, added carefully to a garden, out through your crop growing area, is enough fertilizer, a minimum, but it's enough fertilizer if you use it carefully to grow all the food for one person for 1 year.